About a week ago, Samsung announced two phones, the Galaxy S10 Lite and the Galaxy Note 10 Lite, and never in my life has it taken me this long to wrap my head around a couple of smartphones. My first reaction was, oh cool, new flagship phones, but then this quickly turned to confusion as I looked at their frankly bizarre choice of specifications. After delving even further though, it's all starting to fall into place. In a weird way, these devices might just be one of Samsung's smartest decisions ever. So first up, the Galaxy S10 Lite. Your first impression will probably be similar to mine, a fantastic 1080p Super AMOLED display on the front, especially when you switch the color mode from natural to vivid. You've got great software powered by Samsung's latest One UI 2 skin running on top of Android 10, which brings a whole number of small refinements over last year's offering, and I'd even go as far to say a really good camera. It takes photos with great dynamic range, in most cases indistinguishable from the most expensive Samsung phones. There's also an ultra-wide and a macro camera for super close-up shots. A bit of an unusual combination, but fine. However, the more I used it, the more questions I started to have. It's an S-series phone, a title Samsung has always reserved for only their top-level flagships, so why call it that when they've skipped the pure glass construction used for every other S-series phone in years in exchange for what feels like plastic? In the hand, it's strikingly similar to one of their mid-range A-series phones. And the timing of the whole thing. The phone is equipped with last year's Snapdragon 855 chipset. It's branded as one of last year's phones, so why on earth did they wait a whole year before releasing it? There's nothing inherently wrong with this 855 chip, by the way, but with the pace of the current smartphone market, by waiting a year, this previously flagship processor is now available in mid-range phones. Plus, the S10 Lite and the Note 10 Lite, which I'll get to because that is even weirder, they launch at the end of this January. That's barely 2 weeks before the company's next-gen flagships come in. The whole thing is head-scratchingly confusing. So, armed with what felt like 100 questions, I went to go and meet with a chief engineer behind the two phones, and I think I can finally explain what's happening here. On a bit of a side note, if you are enjoying this video, a sub would be amazing. I'm trying to hit 5 million by the end of the year, so we've got to start somewhere. Samsung's current budget phones, let's take the Galaxy A10 in the UK, they sit at around £100. Their mid-range phones, like the new Galaxy A51, sit at just over £300, but their upcoming flagships will probably start at no less than £700. So that means, even though we've already split phones into budget, mid-range and top tier, because of the sheer range in prices now, we almost need another category, the high but not top end, and that's exactly what the S10 Lite is meant to target, at around £580. It's a phone with compromises compared to the mainline Galaxy S10, but also a surprising amount of benefits, and that's what separates it from one of their mid-range phones. In most cases, a mid-range phone basically starts with a flagship and then makes a whole load of things less good, but this feels like it was built from the ground up to just be different. It's not actually plastic, for starters. It's a compound they call glastic, created by fusing glass and plastic together, which gives it the drop resistance of plastic, and let's be honest, the feel of plastic, but with the potential silver lining of slightly better scratch resistance, a property of glass. And this 48 megapixel camera is, in a way, the best camera Samsung has ever put on a smartphone. It comes with a completely redesigned stabilization system that means videos come out almost cinematic, even though I'm walking here without being particularly careful. In low light too, where Samsung's video has historically fallen apart, the S10 Lite manages to control bright spots and minimize grain. In situations like this, it is better than the camera on the £2,000 Galaxy Fold. For photos and general versatility, I wouldn't say it's quite there, but the point is that this is not a worse camera, it's different. You might remember a phone called the Galaxy S10e that was launched alongside the Galaxy S10, literally just as a cheaper alternative. But whilst in terms of name, the S10 Lite sounds similar, its purpose is actually very different. It feels a lot like this was made for the younger generation, people who want a big screen to view content and a great video camera to capture it, people who are a bit more budget constrained and who don't care as much about things like a headphone jack because they've grown up in a world of wireless. The S10 Lite's problem is not at all that it's a bad phone. It feels reliable and snappy, and the addition of a 4500 mAh battery is an absolutely amazing move by Samsung. It's just that it feels a bit misclassified. It's so different to the other Galaxy S phones that my first impression was that it should have had an entirely new name altogether. Maybe the Galaxy H11. H would be this new category of high but not top-end phones, and the 11 would match with the upcoming Galaxy S11 series. But I have a theory about why they've named them the way they have, which I'll get to. Now, that leaves us with the other piece of the puzzle, the Note 10 Lite, a phone launched alongside the S10 Lite as a sort of dynamic duo, but the odd thing is that they have such little in common. For the first time in history, the Note phone is expected to be cheaper than the S phone. I've been told to expect around a £530 price compared to $580. The Note has a headphone jack when the S10 Lite doesn't. The Note has only 25-watt fast charging, while the S10 Lite has 45-watt super fast charging. The Note has a much smaller hole punch at the top, even though both phones have basically the same front camera, but it gets even weirder. The good is that it's got an equally impressive 6.7-inch 1080p AMOLED display, and it shares the massive 4500 mAh battery too, but bizarrely the phone has a completely different camera setup to the S10 Lite. For two phones launched at the same time with a similar price, it just begs the question why. You're looking at a 12-megapixel main sensor instead of 48, and the macro camera has been swapped for a more conventional 2x telephoto. But the strangest part here is the choice of chipset. Whilst we've had the year-old Snapdragon 855 chip on the S10 Lite, the Note 10 Lite ships with the 2-year-old Exynos 9810. That's the same chip we saw on the Galaxy S9, just weeks before the Galaxy S11 comes out. It's not a bad chip, it'll hold its own versus mid-range processors in 2020, it's just, by the time you've used this phone for even a year, it's a little alarming that the hardware inside will be 3 years old. So again, putting on my detective guise, the differences with the S10 Lite, I think, boil down to this. With both of these phones, Samsung was not thinking, okay, we've got the S10 Plus and the Note 10 Plus, how can we downgrade them to fit a much lower price tag? They were thinking about two very different types of consumers they wanted to target. So compared to the S10 Lite for younger generations, the Note feels like their enterprise solution, the phone for more mature business users. Video quality isn't as good, but if you think about it, that's less important for these kinds of consumers, and the photo quality is flagship level. It's got a headphone jack, as this older demographic may be less familiar with wireless, and of course, being a Note phone, you do get Samsung's S Pen in all its glory, which is a business tool in itself. It feels just as good here as it does on their more expensive offerings, and it comes with a whole suite of S Pen features. And the reason that hole punch is smaller on the Note is actually because both phones use different display technologies. They look the same, but the S10 Lite is actually much slimmer and lighter, but that's why it needs this extra padding around the front camera. Now, in the same way that the S10 Lite feels a little bit misclassified, so does this Note. This glass-stick construction, combined with the weaker chip, doesn't do the Galaxy Note brand a whole lot of justice, but I think I know why they've done it. Samsung's mid-range phones sell incredibly well, and both the S10 Lite and Note 10 Lite feel like bridge products. In the end, what Samsung really wants is for people to buy their top-end phones, and so by creating an in-between like this, using the names of those flagships, they're getting people who might have previously stuck to buying mid-range A-series phones used to the idea of buying a flagship, with the hope that next time they buy a phone, they'll go all the way and spend $1,000, or even more. Neither supports wireless charging or has an IP rating, but I gotta say, I walked away in the end impressed. Even with all the strange decisions and the confusing naming going on here, both phones offer a good experience, providing you fall into one of the two groups of people they're targeted at. If you enjoyed this video, then do check out my analysis of the equally unusual OnePlus Concept One smartphone. I'll link it from here, and with that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.